So in this video, we're going to be talking about enabling push notifications in your apps if you are using Flutterflow with Supabase. This is by far and away the most requested video I've had since I've been doing this. So here we're going to look at how we set them up and how we can get this to function. So we're going to need a few things. Obviously, if you're using Flutterflow and Supabase, you're going to have those set up already. If you don't, there's plenty of videos on this channel and others where you can get those set up. And also we're going to need two other things to make this work. We are going to be using the OneSignal API. So we're going to be using OneSignal and also a requirement for sending them to Android, which is what we're basing this on, is that you have to have Google Cloud Messaging set up. So even though we are not using Firebase as our authentication and our database, we're using Supabase, we still need Firebase because we need cloud messaging basically, and this is the only way you can send to Android devices. You can actually also send to iOS and web through this, so it's ideal to set up anyway, but the only way you can send to Android is through cloud messaging. So they're the prerequisites and we need to get those set up, and we'll go through that as we go. So there's a lot in this. We're using some API calls from Supabase, using API calls from Flutterflow for different reasons, which I'll explain to when we get to them. And there's a lot to take in, so I recommend you stick around to the end because there is a lot of information to digest to make this work. It is definitely not a simple one. Right, so with that being said, you would already know that we've got this little button here that says enable push notifications. Unfortunately, we can't use that because you have to be using Firebase authentication to enable push notifications with the little toggle button there within Flutterflow. So we're going to have to do it all through API, hence why it's not straightforward and more complicated. Now we do need to set up Firebase. So I have got Firebase set up. We do not have Firebase storage set up. We are still using our Supabase storage for that. So this is purely so we can connect to our Firebase cloud messaging project. Okay, so as you can see, I've already got a project here set up, but when you register for Firebase, you do need to go on the Blaze plan. It's the paid plan, although messaging is actually a free service anyway, so you won't get charged, but you will have to put in your billing details, but you shouldn't be charged, so that's all good. So when you get here, I'll come to the project I'm set up in a minute, but it'll be create a project and you'll enter a project name, which we'll do. Just go to the next stage, and then you'll have to want to enable analytics. You can keep that switched off, it's not necessarily, and it'll prepare the project. So this will be your new Firebase project. This is the first thing you want to be doing, and then you'll add an app to get started, and we're using Android. So you then have to register your app with Firebase. So you'll add your Android package name, which is in your app details. That's your package name. This is something I was messing around with for the AI hackathon, which I didn't end up finishing. But that's why it's called that. Yeah, you want your package name and give it a nickname. If you're not using Auth or Google Sign-In for this, then you don't need the SH1 certificate. I'm using this. I've got that separately in the Cloud Console for my Google login via Supabase, so I don't need that. Then you'll register the app. So if I go to the one I have got set up, so this is the Firebase dashboard, and if we go to our project settings, now if you remember, we were setting up the Android app, and that's essentially what this is. So it's got the package there, the nickname I gave it, and then it gives it an app ID, and then we will need to download the Google Services JSON from here because we need to add that into our OneSignal project when we get to that. So once you've got the app set up, likewise you can do this with iOS and you can do it with web, although we're staying off web for this. This is purely about push notifications. So this is the OneSignal dashboard. So if you again go to OneSignal, sign up for the free tier, because you're not gonna, for testing this out, you're obviously not gonna go over that. And when you get there, you'll need to set up an app. Now, obviously, I've got one set up here, but you will sort of add an app, and it'll ask you which channel. And so we're using Android in this, but it's likewise, you can do the same with iOS. So they're the two that we are mainly dealing with. So you give the app a name, click which channel you want to do. So once you go into the configure platform settings, this is the information that you will basically add. So when you're setting up your Android configuration, you'll need to add the JSON file you've downloaded from your Firebase cloud messaging, which is this JSON here. And also you'll need your Firebase project ID, which is the name of your project on Firebase. Then if you click save and continue, that is basically your configuration setup. And I selected server API for the SDK because we are connecting via the API to our Android project. So that's why I've selected that. Whether that's the right way to do it, I do not know, but that's what's made it function, so that's fine. And then that takes us back to there. So that's set up and active. So that's good. And then the other thing you need to do on the setup front is enable Firebase within your Supabase app. So if you type in your Firebase project ID, click the tick button, and it'll ask if you want to generate the config files, I think I seem to remember, and then it'll do its thing and it'll connect. The only thing you need to do is you need to add users and permissions. You need to add Firebase at flutterflow.io as an editor in your Firebase project. So when it goes to get the config files and set itself up, it has access to do so. So that's something you need to do. So if you've set up Firebase before, you're going to know this anyway. But if you haven't set up Firebase before, that's what you need to do. So once you've done that, you will have your Firebase messaging project set up on the Blaze plan. You will have your OneSignal project set up and set up to work with Android, and that's on the free plan. And then you will have Firebase connected to your Flutterflow app, and that's all you need to do. You don't need to do anything else on the Firebase front here. You do not need to use the OneSignal enablement within Flutterflow, and you don't need to enable Firebase storage because we're not using any of that stuff. We're keeping everything within Supabase, as I've already said. So with that said, now then, how have I set this up? So as always, any snippets of code you see that I'm using for custom actions will be available on the link below. You can just go copy and paste and use them in your project. And we'll need some extra packages, which we'll get from pub.dev, which I'll explain, because you can't just use the latest ones. You've got to go backwards and use previous versions because of conflicts. This is, like I say, there's a lot to this. It's fun and games. So what have we done? So first off, I have given our user on the settings page an option to enable notifications, and these two buttons are conditional visibility. So basically, if notifications are not enabled for our app on our Android device, we get the enable notifications option, and if notification settings is authorized, we get the notification settings button. So if notifications are authorized on our device, we'll get notification settings option visible to us as a user, and if it's not yet enabled, we'll get the enable notifications button. And how we do that, we have got a custom action on page load. So I'll open up the editor, and what we're doing, we're checking notification permissions, and this is where we need our Firebase messaging dependency. Now, the latest one you can use is 14.9.2 because the Firebase messaging needs Firebase core as well to function. So if we go to our pubsec, so Firebase core, so we've got Firebase core. When you enable Firebase, Firebase core is added to your app by Flutterflow, and it adds currently version 2.31.0. Okay, now if we go to Firebase, so if you go on pub.dev, type in Firebase messaging, and obviously it'll be the top version. The most recent version is 15.1.0. And you'll see down the bottom the dependencies on Firebase core is the most recent version is 3.4.0. So Flutterflow obviously goes quite a way back on that. It was 2. Whatever it was sort of 2.3, 1.0, I think. So I think that's the version we're currently using on Flutterflow, if memory serves me right from then. I know it was only a few seconds ago. So therefore, to work, so make sure everything functions and you don't get conflicts in your packages, you need to make sure that you are going back to use 14.9.2. So this is the version of Firebase messaging you'll be using. Anything beyond that, it won't work. You'll get a conflict of dependencies, you'll get a clash, and it won't compile. So that's something to bear in mind. So don't just copy and paste the dependency from there like you would normally do. Make sure you actually manually type in the 14.9.2 to make sure you're getting the right one, because that's what works with the Firebase core that we are working with. Now then, basically what we are returning is a string, and we are asking our device to let us know if notifications are authorized or not. So I've chosen to go with authorized and then everything else rather than to make it overly complicated. So basically, if our notifications are authorized, then we'll see the notification settings option. If the notifications are not authorized or are anything else other than authorized, then you'll get enable notifications, basically, and that's why I've chosen to do it. Obviously, you could make it more complicated and have all kinds of conditional options based on the other options, but I've tried to keep it as simple as I can, and I think authorized or anything else is probably a fair usage of it anyway, I would think. So that's that. So on the assumption that our user has not yet enabled notifications, so when you open the app, you'll see the enable notifications option. So if I open up Android Studio, you can see there I've got the enabled notifications, that's physical device plugged in, and I've got the enable notifications option visible there, which we will set up shortly. And then obviously we have then got some actions on there. So once you tap that, we've got some conditional actions. So we've got a page state called subscribed, and that is pulling information from our users table in Supabase. So if we go to there, that is pulling. So we've got some additional information here. We've got the OneSignal user information there. We've got the device token and the device token date, all of which I'm going to come on to. Don't worry, I'll explain all this. So we'll need some extra rows in our users table. But what we're currently pulling there is the subscribed. So when your user table is set up, this will just default to null, and when a user signs up, and then when they subscribe to notifications, it will go to true, and when they unsubscribe from notifications, it will go to false. And we're doing this to help with the logic in how we manage what information we show the user and how we connect to the API of OneSignal. So like I said, the other information here we will come to shortly. So that page state we're updating with, is our user subscribed or not? So essentially we've got three options: true, false, or null. So essentially if it's not false, i.e. if it's true or null, we're going to go this way. Now the reality of it is it's never going to be true because of where I've set this up. So what happens is the user, when they sign up, it will be null because they are currently not had the option. They've not been given the option to subscribe to notifications yet. So when they sign up, it will be null. So this on this screen, it will never be true. It'll either be null or false. And the way I've got this set up, and I'll go through that as we go through, and with the unsubscribe and what we're doing, and I'll come back over this and explain it again. So like I say, you do need to stick around because there is a lot to this one. It really isn't that simple to do. So if they are not yet subscribed, which is that, they'll go down this route, and if they've opted out, which is when it'll be false. So if somebody opts out of notifications, that then becomes false, that page state, based on the option in the table, and then they go down this route. So in the first instance, we're going down this route, and what we are then doing is requesting permissions for notifications. So to do that, you need to enable permissions. So we've got the app name, would like to send you notifications, and then that's the message. I mean, you can obviously cater that to what you want, and also got location there. And then what that does, when you tap on the text to enable notifications, you'll get the little box, the Android box that says allow or disallow notifications, basically. And then the next thing we do then is notifications. Is it true, basically? So if notifications, i.e. if it's true, you go down this route, and if it's false, so if your user denies the notifications, they'll get an alert that just says you can change notification preferences in your device settings, and then that'll close that. And then if they say allow notifications, then we go down here, and then we get to the next piece of information. Now for that is we need a custom action to get the device token. So it's the Firebase cloud messaging requires a token for the device, which identifies that device so it can send it the messages. And to do that, we need a custom action. So the custom action is get FCM token. Again, this is all part of Firebase messaging, and what we're doing, we just get token, basically returning the token. That's all we're doing there. Just asking the device to send us the token for that particular device and returning it, and we are storing it in an app state, and that app state we have got set as persisted because it's a constant. It's not going to change, although there is a caveat to that, which I'll come to in just a second. So we've got an app state with the device token in case we need to use it again, which we don't really, but we've got an app state if we need it. And then what we are doing then, we are updating our Supabase table with the FCM token, the date, which is important, and whether subscribe, we're obviously now changing to true. So what we're doing there, we are writing the FCM token, the token date, and setting the subscribe to true, which if you remember at the top, that is how we're determining which route we go down, and it will also be the same when we unsubscribe, which I'll come to shortly. That's what we need it for. So FCM tokens is how as I just said, how your device is recognized by cloud messaging to send it the notifications. The token stays with the device, but they do expire. So the reason I've put the date on, I haven't set it up in this example, but FCM tokens expire after 270 days of inactivity. So if your device has not received any notifications for 270 days, that token will expire. So really I've put this in this instance so it's something we can manage in the future. Obviously, if a user's not subscribed to notifications for 270 days, a chance they're not using your app anyway. So it's probably not something that is going to be a big issue. But the purpose of this, I've put it in here for future. So at some point you may want to look into what to do with that if you need to recreate the token and get a new date if the user comes back online, basically. So, but I think for the purpose of this, that's probably a little bit beyond where we're going with this. But just so you know, the tokens do expire after 270 days, hence why the date's there, and that just gives us a bit of options in the future to do something about it if we need to or if we wish to. So that's why I've put that in there. So after we have updated our database with that information, our next action is to add our user who is subscribed to push notifications to our OneSignal dashboard, and that is this custom action. So add push user. Now I've done this via Supabase. So we've got add push user, and basically it's just a standard remote procedure call, calling a Supabase function, and we're sending in the token itself, obviously the user ID, because we're going to identify which row of the table we're dealing with, and the status on whether they're subscribed or not. So that's the information we're adding in there. So obviously the status will change to true, the user ID we're sending there, the device token we have essentially got from that custom action there via the cloud messaging dependency. And then basically what we're doing then, we are navigating to users. I'll come onto the Supabase side in a second, just close this this small section off. So we're navigating to users. What I've done, rather than just close the box, I've re-navigated, because what then that will do is re-initialize the check notification permissions, and then we'll make sure that which one of these displays correct. So therefore the enable notifications will disappear, and the notification settings will be visible when you've closed, when you've navigated back to this page. Basically, when you've closed the box. So all those things basically happen when you click on the allow button on the requesting notifications box. All the things happen, navigates back to this page, and then you'll have notification settings up because you've already enabled them. So the remote procedure call that I've just mentioned, which is add push user. So we're going to push user OneSignal Supabase function. Okay, so if you've seen any of my videos, you'll recognize this. I use this all the time for connecting to APIs using Supabase and the Postgres HTTP extension. Now, this is the function we're calling from Flutterflow, and obviously we're adding in the device token, which I've said, we're sending in the user ID, and we're sending in the status, which will be true. And then we are constructing our API request to the OneSignal API. We're doing that using the JSON build object. I will go to documentation in a second so we can have a look at it, but essentially we are got an object called subscriptions, and in it we've got a type, and it's Android push in this instance. It may be iOS push, obviously. Our token is our token that we are adding into the function here, and then our status enabled will be true. So are we enabling our notification status to subscribe? Yes, we are, so therefore true. And then we're sending an external ID into the OneSignal system so we can identify the user, and that is our user ID, which is our standard user ID that we use everywhere. And then that's how we construct the body of our API call. And then on your headers, I'll go to documentation. We have got the API endpoint, we've got the type, which is post, and then we've got our headers, which is our API key, which obviously I've hard coded in here. Normally I pull these from the Supabase Vault, which I will do it in time and set that up to do. But if that's something you want to do from off the bat, there is a video for setting that up from Supabase Vault, which you can just follow along. It's dead easy to do, but just for speed and ease, I just hard coded it in there. I've just removed it for obvious reasons, and then we've got the content type and everything else. And then at the end, we get a JSON response, which is essentially our subscription details for our user. And what we were doing, we are that JSON response in its entirety, we are adding to our table in the OneSignal column, where obviously on the row of our user. So if you remember when I showed you the table, we have got this column here, which is OneSignal as a JSON-B. So the response we get from the OneSignal API which gives us our subscription ID and some other information that we're going to need later. We just put that in there as it's JSON in entirety, and then we'll pick through it later when we need to. So we've got the information for if our user needs to unsubscribe. That's why we need to do that. So that's that function. Once again, this will be available to download below. So you can just copy and paste it, but you may have seen this before, and there are videos on the channel how I go through this and I explain it in much more detail about why we do this, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. So there'll be something on the screen now if you want to go back and follow along with that. So basically with that, our user is subscribed to notifications. So we can now send our user push notifications either via the dashboard, which we'll come to, or either via the API, which also we'll come to. So our user is now subscribed to notifications within our app. So now obviously they may want to unsubscribe, and this is where I think it probably gets more complicated, if I'm being honest. So as I said on the outset, when a user is subscribed, they will see the notification setting options. So if I enable notifications, and then you'll get the message which I mentioned a few minutes ago. So if we click on allow, and then we navigate to the page, and we've got notification settings. Then if I go to Supabase, we have now got our device token in there. As you can see, we subscribe to true, and we've got the device token date, which is date and time now, and then that's our response from the OneSignal API. So we've got that information in there should we need it later. Okay, so one thing I think I did forget to mention actually on the documentation, so apologies for that. When we create our user on our API endpoint, so if I go back to we've got this information in the middle here, which we need. That is actually our app ID. So on our settings in keys and IDs, obviously you've got your API key, and then you've got your app ID, and that is what goes in the middle of your API URL. And while we're on the subject of this, actually, the documentation, it is quite handy because you have the information here, the basic, but if you want to try and ascertain how to construct this and the information you need, there is a little handy tool at the bottom where, for instance, we can put the app ID in there. So I put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it comes in there. And then if we want to add some information regarding the user and the identity, so for instance, Android push and enable true, and then some other information here which we are using later on when we're unsubscribing, and it'll tell you the information you need to add into your API request to make this work. So it's actually quite a handy tool. So again, the OneSignal documentation, I'll put the link in the description below. If you want to subscribe to OneSignal, it's easy to find, but I'll put the link anyway in case you want to review this before you actually even get into it. So where were we? We had a user subscribe to notifications. Okay, so if a user wants to unsubscribe from notifications, they click on the notifications settings button, and what all that does, that just opens a dialog box called notification. I've got a custom component. So we go, and it's called notification. And so when you tap on notifications, all that happens is you open this box, and I've kind of styled it to try and look like the other one. It doesn't look 100% the same when it's actually on the screen of the phone, but it's not too bad. So if you want to keep active, basically all that does is dismiss the dialog, so it doesn't do anything. So if you've gone into your tapped on that, either accidentally or whatever, and then or you change your mind, say, actually no, I want to keep them active, I don't want to turn notifications off, just go and keep active, and it just diminishes the dialog. That's obviously nice and easy. But if you don't want to turn them off, we have to go through this process. So we've got a custom action called update push user, and all that one actually does, despite it being called update push user, it goes and gets the subscription ID which we need. So we've got a user now, so if we go to subscriptions, we have now got a user subscribed in our OneSignal dashboard here, and there's a subscription ID, and this is the one that we want to turn off because this user basically wants to disallow notifications or unsubscribe from notifications. So then we need this subscription ID, which is why in the Supabase table we have kept this information in its basically in its standard form, and we want the subscription ID basically, which is that, and we need to get that to send back to the OneSignal API to unsubscribe our user. So that's what we're doing here, and then the custom action for that, get the OneSignal subscription ID. Basically, our JSON in our table is a list of objects, but we want the first object because there is only the one, and so it's index 0 and we want the ID. So what we're doing, we're selecting from the OneSignal column, the subscription section, the first object, we want the ID of it, and then we're returning that, which is a subscription ID, which I've just showed you what it is. And then that's what we're returning to Flutterflow there, and that's the string we're returning from this function. Next up, we are adding it into an app state, which because we're going to use it again a bit later on, and I've left that app state as persisted. Whether it needs to be, I don't think it really matters actually, to be honest with you, but I've set that app state as persisted. And then we're actually doing a backend call in Flutterflow to unsubscribe rather than doing it through Supabase, and this is where it tries to get kind of confusing, and it does seem like kind of a roundabout way of doing it as well, but unfortunately it's necessary. If anything, what I would probably do is maybe create the user within to Flutterflow, and just means you'd have to write that JSON to the table separately. The reason I kept creating the user in Supabase was because I was obviously writing directly to the table, and I do like using Supabase, as you know, so it just makes it easy to put it in there for me. But the problem we have with this, so if we go to our API call, so we're doing this within Flutterflow, and the reason we're doing it in Flutterflow is the method, and that's patch. Because if we go to the documentation and we're going to update our subscription basically, and as you can see the method is patch. Now unfortunately the HTTP extension doesn't seem to support patch. I tried it and I couldn't get it to work. It says that it's not available in the available functions, it's not there basically, so it doesn't support it, so it doesn't support patch, so therefore you can't do this element of the connection to OneSignal through Supabase, but you can do it through Flutterflow, which is why it's where it is and not keeping it consistent. You can bring the create user into Flutterflow if you wish, if you wanted to keep it, if you want to keep everything sort of standard using one method. But basically we are essentially creating same thing again. So on the docs, our endpoint, you've got the app ID and the subscription ID we need within our API endpoint. So there we've got our app ID and our subscription ID, which is a variable obviously because it isn't a constant, because every user's got a different subscription ID. And then in our body, so essentially we are constructing our API request in the same manner as this one, and so we need our headers, and therefore we've got application JSON, we've got the accept application JSON, we've got the authorization with the API key. So that would be your API key goes in there. Again, if you're not sure on how to set up API calls from Flutterflow, there is a video for that as well. I'll put that on the screen so you can go and have a look at that as well. And then in the body, we have got some variables. We've got our subscription, which is true or false. We have got something called notification types. I'll come on to that in a second. I'll show you what it is in the docs. And that is an integer, which is 1 or minus 99. And we've got type being string. So essentially what we're doing here is the type that's like Android push, basically. So basically we've got these variables. So we've got the subscription, are they subscribed, true or false? The type is the Android push, and the notification types is something in OneSignal, which I will come and show you now. And we've got that 1 or minus 99. 1 is if they are subscribing, and minus 99 is if they're unsubscribing, basically. So, and if we go down here, say in the app ID is required and the subscription ID is required, as I've covered those. The app ID you get from your OneSignal dashboard, and the subscription ID, obviously we've got that stored in a app state variable. And then basically enable true or false. Essentially it defaults to true, but we need to set it to false if they're unsubscribed in this instance, obviously. And then notification types. Now I didn't have this included in the user subscription, but I just found some reason it worked better with having this enabled for the unsubscription. I had a couple of issues with it not changing the user in the OneSignal dashboard, but once I introduced the notification types, it worked. So that's why I've left it in. Whether that made a difference or not, it was just something else I did, I don't know. But if it's not broke, don't fix it, I guess. So we're setting this to minus 99 to go with false. So, and it says there, use with notification types property. So that's what we're doing. We are setting that to minus 99 because we're unsubscribing. And then the type is just the type there, and we're basically Android push in this instance, or it'd be iOS push if that's what you're working with. So that is our API call that unsubscribes our user from notifications, which when they click turn off, that's what that does. It literally unsubscribes our user from their notifications. And then what we are doing then, we're updating our Supabase table, and we're not doing anything with the other OneSignal information, the token or anything else, but we are doing to change subscribe to false. So what we're saying for our own internal checks, because we're going to use it, we do need it again, we're saying that this user is no longer subscribed, and that then becomes false. And that's what that is. And then basically we open the app settings. So what that will do, it'll automatically divert our user to the settings of their app to unsubscribe, because they have to do that, obviously, to unsubscribe from the notifications. And then we're just missing the dialog. So open app settings is another custom action. And we have got another package. This one you can use the most recent version. So if we go app settings, is that the one there? I think 5.1.1. So this is basically the library we're using as a dependency, and what it does, it just literally opens our settings for our app within our device. That's what that does, so the user can unsubscribe. And then once that's done, the box will disappear and our user will be no longer subscribed to our notifications. So and you can see there, we clicked on the turn off notifications, and we've got our permissions thing. We're going to then go and switch those off, and then we go back a few steps, takes back to our app, and then enable notifications is now back on. So our user is now unsubscribed from notifications. So if I update that, it says never subscribed. I think that's something to do with the one and the -99, but it does allow you to switch it back on and off. So there's maybe a better way of doing it. But it functions. It switched them on, switched them off. So I didn't worry about that overly, rather than sort of unsubscribed, whatever else it might say. So back into our users page, and then as you can see, we're now enable notifications is now available again. So if a user wants to re-engage with our notifications, they click the button. So in the actions, our status will now be false because our user is now not subscribed. So if remember, it started off as null, and if remember I said that in this page here it will never be true. It'll either be null when they first start, or it'll be false when they've unsubscribed. True won't come into it on this set of actions. So we're requesting permissions again. Do you allow or not notifications, yes or no? Obviously if it's not, you'll go and get the dialog again that says you can change your notifications anytime in your app settings. If you click yes, what we'll do then, go back to Supabase and turn the subscribe back to true for our sort of logic within our app when we're using that. And then we are making the back end call, and we are turning subscription back to true. Now what I have done, if I go back into the API on the variables, on the notification type, remember this was the 1 or -99 option. The default value is 1. I've left it as 1, so therefore we don't need to set it as 1. We're making the call only if we're changing it to -99, hence why I haven't included that in the call. It's already set to 1 as its default. So we only set to -99 if we're unsubscribing. If we're resubscribing, we don't need to do anything. It's set to 1. So that makes the API call that resubscribes us to notifications, and then we're just again navigating back to users. So it should show us the notifications settings option. Should show us that option again, because remember that is conditional based on if notifications are enabled or not on a action on page load. So we've unsubscribed. We want to subscribe again. So do we want to subscribe? So we've got notification settings back, and in Supabase we'll subscribe back to true. And then if we refresh the user, they are subscribed again. So that's the logic for setting up our user subscribe to our notifications and unsubscribe and resubscribe and unsubscribe, or as they want to. So next, I just actually send the push notifications, but I'm mindful of the length, so I'm actually going to do that in a second video, because we'll be doing that in 2 methods. We'll be doing that via sending push notifications via the OneSignal platform, and we'll be sending them via API using Supabase. So that's it for this video. Hopefully that answers the questions I've been asked to how to do this. Like I say, it really isn't straightforward. It takes a bit of thinking about. But say the code will be available to download as usual. Follow the video, pause it where you need to, and all the rest of it. Follow it through. It does work. Like I say, hopefully that's useful. If it does, please consider like and subscribe, and I'll speak to you in the next video where we will actually send the notifications to our devices.